Boker Tov. This is the beginning of American Heritage Month. This is American Indian Day, I think. But I just thought of mention an interesting parallel between America, Israel, and many places in the world. We get criticized oftentimes for what we did to the natives, to the native Indians. And Israel faces world condemnation and criticism for what people feel is an unjustified occupation. People think of Israel as being Palestine, when in fact there is no country Palestine. Palestinia, Syria Palestinian, is a territory that was named by the Romans after Israel's enemies when it crushed them after the destruction of the Second Temple. It was a way of punishing the Hebrews like they did with cutting down all the trees. Now, the thing is that this is a time when we also recognize that God told Abraham to go to a land that I will show you. And some people believe that the people that founded this nation, whether it's the Pilgrims, the Puritans, Columbus, and others, were going to a promised land also, to a land that God was going to show them, where they could have religious freedom. In both cases, these people had to conquer, and they had to conquer native tribes. And so it was in America, and so it was in the land that God promised the Hebrews. The deed is right there in the Bible. It's actually a territory considerably larger, multiple times larger than the area that we think of as Israel today. If Israel was Israel as it is in the Bible, you'd have to give up Transjordan and good portions of Syria and other places, because Israel, Eretz Israel, the original land of Israel, the promised land, is considerably larger than Israel as you know it today. And Hebron was one of the first cities. And of course, Jericho, which is in so-called Palestinian territory, was the first city that Joshua conquered when he entered the land. At the end of Deuteronomy. So, we have a lot in common, because in both cases, the people had to conquer the tribes that were in these areas, and so we had the Canaanites and the ites and the ites and the ites and so many ites that existed in the promised land in Canaan, and of course you had the sea people. The Philistines, the sea people, they were conquerors of the land at one point too. And throughout Europe, lands have been conquered by one group after another, after another, after another. But very few, and only one that I can think of, stands as a nation after all this time. Because, America wasn't in the Bible. Still, it's not in the Bible. Israel is. So there's a land that stands thousands and thousands and thousands of years after it was conquered, after it was occupied by virtue of God's instruction, let alone the purchases, legitimate land purchases, and so forth. So we have legitimate land purchases, some say, of Europeans buying land from the so-called native Indians. So this is a planet that is really, the story of this planet is the story of human conquest, right? Human conquest. So what happens then is really the question of sort of the righteousness of what happens at that point. And there's definitely terrible sides to the story of conquest, and there's wonderful stories that come out of new nations, okay, and there's things that are lost in old nations. But what's interesting is here in America, we have found a way for the Indians to retain land and independence. That's happened here. But you notice they're peaceful. Now, granted, if they were to revolt, they would be crushed by American military, right? And that's happened. And but by and large, they've been profiting. Unfortunately, off of things like gambling and other things, and they have not had necessarily the kind of fruitful life that, you know, they would like it, with their bonds to the land and horses and agriculture and so forth. And they seem happiest, it seems to me, you know, in observation, what little observation I can make, they do seem happy as a native people when they can retain and maintain that indigenous relationship to the land. And in some respects, I think that's when any peoples are happy, is when they maintain a healthy relationship to place. Place is one of the earliest names of God, one of the concepts of God, Makom, a sanctuary, a holy of holies, a place where God exists, where God is communicating in a sense through creation, right? And so I think in some respects, when we observe Mother Nature, there's a closeness, there's a connection that we're able to make to the Creator. When we observe creation, when we connect to creation, we feel somewhat connected to God. And that's why I think there's so much spirituality in the Native Americans, and I think that's why people that like to go outdoors and hike and canoe and, you know, maybe fish and so forth, have this great appreciation of creation as well, although they may or may not believe in a God as some people might perceive him. So I think that when we talk about the Shabbos, we talk about the Sabbath, that's a day when we're instructed halachically to not do certain kind of work. And it's not to do creative work, to do work where we manipulate nature. It's a day when we essentially let our manipulation of nature rest. We don't lift things, and that's somewhat connected to that whole concept. So, you know, there's a genuine time to appreciate nature and God's creation and observe it. And as our own selves, as creators, like in the image of God, observe our creation. That's our children, okay, that's our home, and other ways in which we are little creators, okay. And when we do that, I think there's a lot of profound benefits that come from that, okay. But as we celebrate Native American Day, Native Indian Day, I think it's important not to entirely demonize, villainize the pioneers, the people that sought out freedom, liberty, that sought to proclaim liberty throughout the land. It's also important not to entirely fail to see that there were things that were not good about the pre-existing tribes. They battled one another viciously, okay? And so there was cruelty in these lands. Wherever you go, there's neither side is completely innocent in this whole process. But I think sometimes we get an unbalanced view of it. And this morning I just had some thoughts on the notion of balancing the view. Okay, well, you have a great day.